Hello, I'm Roger Baker, Stratfor's Senior Vice President for Strategic Analysis at RANE. This podcast is brought to you by Worldview, RANE's premier digital publication for objective geopolitical intelligence and analysis. Sign up for our free Worldview newsletter at worldview.stratfor.com.
You're listening to RANE's Essential Geopolitics podcast, powered by Stratfor. I'm Emily Donahue. Ukraine recently passed legislation aimed at reducing the influence of oligarchs. The legislation has been a centerpiece of President Zelensky's re-election campaign, but will it hurt or hinder his political future? Matthew Orr is Stratfor Eurasia analyst at RANE. He joins me now. Welcome, Matthew.
Hi, Emily.
So can you explain exactly what this oligarch bill is and how it was passed?
Yeah, I can. This oligarch bill, well, really kind of an anti-oligarch sentiment and push is really a centerpiece of Zelensky's entire political project. Remember that he won the presidency on this kind of populist, anti-oligarch, anti-elite message. He's a former TV comedian himself, and the president at the time of that election, Petro Poroshenko, was considered an oligarch, and so it was very understandable and easy for him to kind of push that kind of rhetoric. But within the campaign, and immediately once he came into power, there were immediate doubts about the sincerity of this whole anti-oligarch push because there was widespread reporting on Zelensky's ties to his own oligarch, an oligarch named Ihor Kolomoisky, who was, as soon as the Biden administration came into power, was sanctioned by the United States. And so it was immediately very uncomfortable to see, okay, well, exactly how is Zelensky going to do this? And eventually, I guess 2 years into his presidency, he finally got this anti-oligarch bill through a first reading, which was back in July in the Ukrainian parliament, and the bill passed. But it was then subject to over 1,000 amendments because all kinds of members of the parliament had all kinds of issues with it, and some thought it was way too hard on the oligarchs, and it actually violated certain human rights, targeting them for their wealth, while others, of course, thought it was way too weak and wouldn't actually help the situation. And so then the bill really kind of went under this shroud of secrecy for several months. And then at the end of last month, on the 23rd of September, the bill passed very suddenly. The vote was declared, and then they used a special procedure to pass the bill without even examining the over 1,000 amendments proposed to the bill. And so it was passed with kind of a lot of shock and surprise in Ukraine's political sphere, and it came the day after one of Zelensky's chief aides was actually shot at in an apparent assassination attempt, and it was kind of used as a pretext to, okay, we have to push this bill through now.
That's quite dramatic. I mean, 1,000 amendments is pretty insane, huh?
Yeah, it is. That's not standard for all pieces of legislation, and it just goes to show how important this piece of legislation was to Zelensky and kind of the future of Ukraine.
Well, let's talk about how effective it might be. Is it going to work?
Yeah, that's kind of the real question here, and I think the majority of observers appear to believe that it's really not going to work. The main reason is that it basically concentrates the power to declare oligarchs who is an oligarch and who is going to be subject to these new rules that oligarchs will have to agree to. They'll have to report their contacts with members of parliament, politicians. They'll have to limit their holdings in the media, etc. But the problem is that the president, on very unclear grounds, is the one whose administration is going to declare the oligarchs, and there's a lot of room for political maneuvering in that. Secondly, it's also unclear that even if somebody is declared an oligarch, that the actual enforcement of the provisions will be equal across all oligarchs. And here is precisely where Zelensky's former business partner, often called his benefactor or patron, Ihor Kolomoisky, comes in, because Kolomoisky and his ties to Zelensky were actually recently unveiled. They were already basically an open secret, well known throughout Ukraine, but these Pandora papers that came out confirmed all of those suspicions about Zelensky working with Kolomoisky to put his money in offshores. And so it's very doubtful that under those circumstances that Zelensky is really going to distance himself from Kolomoisky. And so, yeah, I think that the general perception is that this is going to be a potentially politicized pushing of this bill.
Matthew, let's talk about how this will play externally with some of Ukraine's partners, including the United States.
Yeah, that's really a key question here. And I think that this bill does open up potentially more avenues for Western partners, particularly the United States, who, as we know, recently announced when Zelensky visited the White House at the beginning of last month that they would launch a new strategic partnership between Ukraine and the United States. But if now that this bill is on the books and once it has to be enforced starting in early next year, if it becomes clear that despite the U.S. coming out at the very beginning of the Biden administration and sanctioning Kolomoisky, that the Zelensky administration is not willing to enforce this bill in a fair way towards Kolomoisky, that could be a point where the U.S. says, okay, well, maybe we need to slow down the development of our strategic partnership because it's clear that this anti-oligarch push is really just kind of a charade or a fraud or a joke or a media spectacle that Zelensky is kind of so used to doing. And so I guess I think there's this idea that Zelensky can get the political benefits of passing this anti-oligarch bill without meeting the downsides and without actually having to uphold it. And upholding it is what international partners definitely would want to see. But the bill in its current form is fairly weak. And with these lingering doubts over equal enforcement, I think that more robust U.S. support going forward is definitely going to be conditioned on its proper enforcement, and that looks pretty doubtful.
Matthew Orr is Stratfor Eurasia analyst at RANE. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Sign up for our free weekly newsletter to stay updated on global geopolitics. Go to stratfor.com/worldview. That's stratfor.com/worldview. I'm Emily Donahue. Thanks for listening.